Greetings, everyone. This is an introduction to Croy chapter 26, which covers the Greek imperatives. Imperatives are familiar to us in English. They're simply commands or prohibitions. Listen to me, come here, do not touch. We will start to build these not with such interesting words, but with our favorite luo, which actually does have some use as an imperative. When Jesus says, untie the colt and bring it here, he uses an imperatival form of luo. Likewise in the Gospel of John when he says, destroy this temple. So we'll see what these forms look like with luo. And as is usually the case with a new mood, which is what the imperative is, we need to learn some new endings. So first, the present active imperative endings. The imperatival mood only occurs in the second and third persons. It still has singular and plural, it still has active and passive, and it still has different tenses, the present and the aorist. But we don't have any first-person imperatives. So what are our imperatival endings? They just have to be memorized. To tell someone in the singular, untie it, you say lu'e. A third-person imperative is lueto. And in the plurals, luete, hey y'all, untie it. And luetosan, let them untie it. For now, we'll focus on the second-person imperatives because those are the easiest to translate into English. So what's going on underneath the hood to make these imperatives? In order to say untie it, you start with the verb, you lop off the conjugated ending, the omega, and you add these new imperatival endings. Lu'e is the way you say to a single person, untie it. If you want to command more than one person, then you're going to use the plural. And so likewise, you start with luo, you lop off the conjugated ending, and you add the plural ending, ete, luet. Let's try this once more with a more interesting verb and just to see how it would work. Let's say we wanted to command someone, believe. So we take our verb pisteuo, and if we wanted to tell one person to believe, we're going to use this singular second person imperatival ending. So we'll start with pisteue. We've lopped off the conjugated ending. We'll add e for the imperative, and we get pisteue, believe me. Similarly, if we want to do this for multiple people, we will use the pisteu plus the plural ending ete, and we get pisteuete. So far, we've been thinking about active imperatives, but now we need to also look at present middle passive imperatives. As you might suspect, these are going to have their own set of endings. The endings are lu'u, lu'esto, lu'este, and estosan. What are we going to do with middle passive? And let's think about how would you say in Greek, go? Well, what's the Greek word for go? Erchomai. And what do you notice already about erchomai? What do you notice about its conjugated ending? It's a deponent verb. And there you have the bulk of the answer. Our middle passive imperatival forms will be used for deponent verbs, which have to have middle passive endings. So let's conjugate the imperative go. First of all, if we wanted to tell one person to go, we'd strip away our conjugated ending omai, giving us the stem erch. And because we're telling just one person, we're going to use the singular middle passive ending. Erch plus u gives us erchu. That's how you say go or come. Likewise, if we want to tell several people, we're just going to use erch plus the plural ending, and that's going to give us ercheste. For the most part, when we encounter the middle passive forms, it will be because we're dealing with deponent verbs which have to use those forms. One of the most common imperatives in the New Testament is don't fear. So we take our verb phabeomai, which is deponent. It's also a contract verb. Our stem is phabe, our ending is u, and we get phabu. If we wanted to tell multiple people, phabe plus este gives us phabeste. I did a quick search in accordance under verbs, present passive imperative, and look what shows up. Me phabeste, do not fear. Next instance, me phabeste. me fabeste, me fabeste. A couple other words get used, but this is simply a search for any and all present passive imperatives. And most of them are not passive in meaning, they're deponents. Any verb that's a deponent, but the one that shows up so often is fear. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. All right. So far, we have only been considering the present tense in the imperative. We've considered two voices, present active and present middle passive. But there is also an aorist active imperative. And these have their own distinct forms. Let's break down how you construct them. First of all, to create an aorist active imperative, we're going to want to start with our principal parts, luo, luso, elusa. We're going to be interested in the third principal part, the aorist. And we're going to want to isolate the aorist stem. How do we do that? We take off the temporal augment and the conjugated ending. So there's our aorist stem, lus. And then, as you see, we just add distinctive aorist active imperative endings, lusan, lusato, lusate, lusatosan. 3 of the 4 of those are pretty easily derivable once you know the present imperative endings. The one that's surprising is lusan, because there's no alpha to tip you off that you're dealing with an aorist. You have to recognize the aorist stem. Let's conjugate a verb in the aorist imperative. Let's use our verb believe. We'll start with our principal parts, pistuo, pistuso, et pistusa. We'll isolate the aorist stem, pistus. And then we'll say we want to tell one person, believe. We start with the aorist stem, we add the aorist active imperative ending, and we get pistusan, believe. If we wanted to tell several people, we take our aorist stem, our second person plural ending, and we get pistusate. Just as there is an aorist active imperative, there are also aorist passive imperatives. Let's look at the forms. Lutheti, lutheto, luthete, luthetosan. Once again, 3 of the 4 forms are somewhat recognizable once you recognize the present active pattern. The oddball is the second person singular. Why would we want to use the aorist passive imperative? When are you most likely to encounter it? Well, let's think about a common deponent verb like go. This time, instead of erkamai, let's use poruomai. How will we form the aorist passive imperative? To start with, we'll need the principal parts. Poruomai, porusomai, et porusamein. There doesn't happen to be a perfect active and passive for this verb. And finally, the 6th principal part, et poruthein. We'll form the aorist passive imperative from the 6th principal part. First, we'll need to isolate the aorist passive stem. We'll get rid of the augment and the conjugated ending. This gives us poruth. And so if we wanted to tell one person to go, and we wanted to use the verb poruomai, which is deponent, the way we would do so in the aorist tense is we would take this aorist passive stem, we would add our singular ending, and we would get porutheti, go. So far, we've been thinking about imperatives in the second person. That is, imperatives directed towards someone else. Thou shalt not. But what about these third person imperatives? How do you even translate that in English? Well, frankly, it's difficult. We don't have a third person imperative. So typically, when rendering a Greek third person imperative, which is a command to a thing, we say, let him be loosened, or in the plural, let them be loosened, or let it, as the case may be. Let's try to give an example of how this works in Greek that makes it less abstract. We'll take a third person singular, and we'll use a real expression from the Bible, one you're already familiar with, let your will be done. Or if we might word it a bit differently to make it easier to do in Greek, let your will happen. In this case, the command is not directed toward God. God, do your will. The command is directed toward this noun, your will. The command is being directed toward this third person thing. So let's try to put this into Greek. We're going to use the verb ginomai. That's why we've worded it, let your will happen. In this case, we'll use the 6th principal part of ginomai in order to create an imperative We will isolate the aorist passive stem. That gives us genaith. And we will take the aorist passive stem. We will add the third person imperative ending because we're telling a thing to do something. Ato, and this results in genetheto. Put all together, genetheto ta thelimasu. Let the will of you happen. Third person imperatives are going to feel a bit awkward for a while, but we'll encounter enough of them because they're not rare in Greek that you'll start to get the hang of it. Finally, to close this introduction to the Greek imperative, let's give an example of a genuinely passive imperative. So far, the examples we've had of passive imperatives have been with deponent verbs, where there's not a real passive sense. But what if we wanted to say something like, "Hey mountain, be thrown into the sea," as Jesus describes powerful prayer being capable of doing? How would we say, "be thrown"? In that sense, we can tell that the voice is passive. We're not telling the mountain to throw, we're telling it to be thrown. So there's a real passive sense. It's not merely deponent. All right, what's our verb for to throw? It's balo. I'm too lazy to write all 6 principal parts, but to get the aorist passive, we want the 6th principal part, eblathane. We want to isolate the aorist passive stem, that's blath. And because we're giving a command to one thing, "Hey you mountain," we want to use the singular ending. So we take our stem, blath, we take our ending, at, and that gives us the imperative, blatheti. Hey mountain, be cast or be thrown into the sea. Okay, this has been a general introduction to the imperative in Greek, and we'll do some more detailed examinations of the imperative with particular verses.